Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests. Thank you kindly for joining this panel. I am Brigadier General Michael Smith. I'm the U.S. Indo-Pacom J6. And this panel here is Innovation in the U.S. Indo-Pacific Theater, Outpacing the Threat. So if you're standing on the periphery, this is going to be one of the most exciting next to the cyberspace panels. So please fill in a seat, and we'll go ahead and get started. So it's going to be an ad hoc panel today, a little hybrid, just to get some fluidity, some conversation. And before we start the actual panel, I will introduce the special guest moderator and the panel members. But from a U.S. Indo-Pacom perspective, I did just want to share a few things. So we are the combatant command that's challenged by a tyranny of distance, geography. And if you think about that, that's the western coast of California all the way to the western border of India, from Antarctica all the way to the North Pole. So that's about 52% of the world's geography. It includes about 50% of the world's population with over 3,000 languages. So it's a tremendous responsibility for a single COCOM. And one of the biggest things that we have is really integrating technologies across the joint force to fight over that tyranny of distance. And hopefully we're going to be able to share some innovative thoughts or solutions that the services or their organizations are currently working on that may be leveraged here in U.S. Indo-Pacom. So with that said, just for the folks that are not familiar with U.S. Indo-Pacom's mission, at the end of the day, really our mission here in theater is to deter aggression, respond and react to crisis, and if necessary, prevail in conflict. And you're constantly going to hear that term prevail. And that's the Indo-Pacom strategy in this theater to actually achieve that effect. So what we're going to do first is really just introduce a few key special guests, one from the J4 from U.S. Indo-Pacom and one from our J7 in U.S. Indo-Pacom, on a thought or challenge that they are having that maybe this panel or maybe industry partners in attendance here can help us solve. So with that said, I'd first like to introduce Brigadier General Martine Kidd, U.S. Indo-Pacom J4. Mike? So General Kidd, I had really just asked her, this is going to be very ad hoc, but just kind of share some challenges or thoughts she has and problems she's trying to solve that maybe this community or panel can help us with.
Great. Challenge one. It might be obvious. Okay, so I've written it down just so that we don't miss any key points here. So thanks for being here, everybody, and good luck on answering and providing your thoughts on this. Predictive analytics for contested logistics require planning tools to not only address the reality of the physics in our theater, the time and distance challenges, but also the red effects that are causing problems for our blue schemes of maneuver and resupply. And of course, this means that we need to incorporate in near real time intel and mission data with logistics and enable a better transition between planning and operations to improve the feedback loop that is inherently challenging. This will require, we believe, automating data fusion and applying AI capabilities. So, how might your organization enable the rapid development of mission-integrated AI-enabled tool that would help the U.S. Indo-Pacom J4 team to visualize, describe, and direct sustainment while melding the strategic, operational, and tactical understanding across an AOR that demands a predictive joint sustainment tool?
General Kidd, thank you kindly for that. Huge problem set from a J4 perspective. She's definitely the right person to lean forward on this and help us solve it. So I appreciate your time, your attendance, your wisdom, and your candor with the question to help solve this. So next we have from the Indo-Pacom J7, Mr. John Wood. Exercise is experimentation. It's his specialty. So, sir, without further ado, if you could share any challenges or problem sets for this community.
I'm oppositely challenged here. Glad to see everybody here on a 3:30 on a Thursday. Thank you. Thank the panelists for doing this. So, from the J7 perspective, we run 23 joint exercises, aggregation of joint power. We do it forward. We're talking all the way out in the Philippines, Thailand, first island chain. And we bring tens of thousands of soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines out there. And we do that to provide that all-domain, critical, integrated force that provide deterrence against any adversary. And we have to do it forward because of what the general said, the tyranny of distance out there. So one of my problems, and I would ask some solution, is we have to be able to train and get that highest level training in live, virtual, and constructive formats. We need to reveal and conceal, meaning I want to reveal a capability to an adversary or I want to conceal it. We have to operate at all levels from unclassified to top secret. And with the J6's help, we need to do it in a mission partner environment with our friends, allies, and partners to create that combat credible force forward. So I need the infrastructure to do that, which we're building now. And I need the ability to fuse and talk real time to get that real time training. And then afterwards, I need to capture that enormous volume of data and quickly analyze it, probably with some AI tools, so that we can provide feedback to the joint force on how well they did and how well they can do. So I would like to ask this panel, if you were in my position as the Deputy Director of J7, how would you tackle this problem?
Thank you kindly, Dr. Wood. So for the audience, we will have about the last 10 to 15 minutes for open questions. But if you really have like a burning question when someone speaks, please feel free to stand up, come use the mic, send your question to the website link, and we have someone facilitating those questions. So if you're an industry partner and you're in the audience, or if you're an ally and partner, again, I just want to say thank you again. All these industry partners that are out here, I don't know why they're not sitting over here, because we're putting out requirements, challenges, and gaps that we have in Indo-PACOM, and that's really the purpose of this entire event. So for the folks that are here, I appreciate you helping us solve our problem sets to help us succeed in our mission. So thank you again. So with that said, and to that very point, the desired state, not the end state, but what this is innovation partnerships to fill our gaps and seams, and that's the whole purpose. So we intend to do that, and these partnerships with the people at the table and the folks in the audience will help us achieve that. So for the special panel members, some of them have traveled long and far. Greatly appreciate your time and your expertise. From the Army Software Factory, we have Colonel Vito Errico. Thank you kindly. From USIRPAC Chief Data Officer, we have Ms. Meredith Fonseca. From the US Indo-PACOM DIU, we have Mr. Christopher Murphy. And from Air Force Research Laboratory, we have Colonel Greg Stevens. So thank you all kindly for being here. Save your applause. I got one more introduction to do, and then we'll get started. So our special moderator today is Mr. Abdul Subhani. He's a Pakistani-born American businessman, author, investor, and philanthropist. He's currently the president and CEO of Centex Technologies, an IT consulting company that he founded in 2006. He later established the Subhani Foundation in 2010. Through his foundation, he supports youth education in both technology and sciences, and Abdul is an investor on process improvement, digital transformation, cybersecurity, and digital forensics. More importantly for this community, in 2020, the Secretary of the Army named Mr. Subhani a CASA, Civilian Assistant to the Secretary of the Army, for his expertise, his human nature, and his influence in the field. In 2023, Mr. Subhani was appointed as the Distinguished Chair of Innovation and Strategy Engagement for the United States Military Academy at West Point. He's also a recipient of the 40 Under 40 Award from AFCEA. Also in 2023, Texas A&M University, Central Texas, recognized Mr. Subhani by naming the Subhani Computer Information Systems Department, and they began the Ruqayya Zubair Faculty Fellowship in honor of Mr. Subhani's mother. Amongst the numerous accolades, achievements, and things that Mr. Subhani has accomplished, more importantly, Abdul, and a personal friend of mine, is just an amazing human. So recently, the Exchange Club of Killeen has awarded him the Golden Deeds Award for his numerous and various charitable efforts, humble dedication, and service to the community. So, sir, thank you kindly for being here, making the time, and to the audience and folks, please help me welcoming the panel and Mr. Subhani for this effort.
Well, thank you very much, General Smith, for a kind introduction. Appreciate everyone here on the panel for being here, and most importantly, everybody here who's listening to us. And I totally agree with you, General Smith. All our partners, industry partners, should be listening to this conversation as well. So hoping that you guys will make sure to put the word out. So as a couple of questions have already been asked, so I'll start with Colonel Errico, if you can give your thoughts on General Kidd's question.
Yeah, so at the Army Software Factory, I think the capability that my organization would bring to bear to assist with that problem is something that we do every day, and that's we prototype a future force design in which units around the Department of Defense can solve their own problems as rapidly as possible with modern technologies. Ma'am, to be able to do that, you've got to be extremely conversational and commercial off-the-shelf technologies. You got to have the right people underneath you that are not just well-trained, they're well-organized, and that they're empowered to be able to go do that for you in a very ambiguous situation that spans not only the warfighting functions, but also technology. They have to have an understanding of business acumen to understand how to interact with that industry. And then you don't want to wait 8 to 10 years for that solution to be fielded. As General Smith pointed out, you need that solution immediately. So I think for my portion of the panel, what I would say is the Army Software Factory can provide you a blueprint for how to organize your directorate to be able to solve that and other problems with a versatility that is demanded of the modern information environment. And I'll kind of probably cede the floor to Meredith.
Go ahead, Meredith. Yep, happy to.
Ma'am, that's a pretty challenging question. So I appreciate it, but I think it also helps humble us to the challenge that you have in this sustainment mission. I also appreciate your appetite for bringing in innovators and data-centric solution-based approaches, because for some folks, leaning into AI feels a little risky, right? Then on top of that, we start to look at this fusion of commercial and government. I think to Vito's point, potentially we look at something like a hybrid approach. So we can build things inside the government, right, as a GOTS solution, and we can buy capability off the shelf. Absolutely nothing prohibits us from making a hybrid that's really tailored where, to your point, we optimize everything that's already being conducted in the intel community and everything that's happening in the commercial sustainment industry and in the AI sector together. In order for any of those things to work, a build, a buy, or a hybrid, we must have standardized data. So I think we need to lean in collectively across all the soft service components in data standardization. Where do we use AI-based capabilities to standardize large volumes of data for us? And then when we talk about prediction, I think having a understanding, a shared viewpoint of what our risk tolerance is really healthy. Never will statistics perfectly predict anything, right? And if they did, it was luck or accident. No matter how much wonderful historical training data we have on a predictive future activity, there are so many influence factors. So understanding what your risk is, and is a 70% solution adequate? Is a 90% solution the only acceptable one that we will trust and therefore do data-driven decision making on? With both of those things, I think certainly the Chief Data Office down in your service component at USIRPAC can be a partner to the Tiger team.
So for a joint sustainment development tool, there's probably three main components that need to come together for this, and each of them are owned in some way by different organizations. The first one is the data, and organizations like CDAO are well positioned to help here, to be that access to the diverse array of data sets across the various services, and not only bring that into a common access point, but also to condition and characterize that data so that it can then be brought in. That's where I'll take a slightly different viewpoint there, is that it's a challenging reality to say that across the various services that we can undo data decisions or investments that were made previously or going to be made without the influence or understanding of what Indo-PACOM is trying to do. So its ability to take these diverse data sets for what they are, bring them in, condition them, reformat them, make them usable and accessible to the next part, which is that sort of core tool, that model that addresses sort of all of the facets of joint sustainment, right? It's not just ammunition, it's not just fuel, it's the broader set of things that help project force and sustain force forward over time. Everything that will administratively or bureaucratically hold you up. You know, everything from hospital beds to ports and fuel, access basing, overflight will all have some sort of influence here. And this is where the leading edge of AI in the commercial industry can really come into play here, where we can leverage these complex data sets or complex approaches, apply it to our data sets and our problem set in order to deliver a unified tool. That all has to be informed by that third part, which is the operational requirements owner, which in this case is the Indo-PACOM J4. And I think that if you start bringing those three together, you prototype it, you deliver a product that not only meets Indo-PACOM's requirements, but at its core, probably to the 90th percentile, meets global COCOM requirements. So you have a capability that is transferable to EUCOM, CENTCOM, and any other combatant command.
From the AFRL perspective, I think we're actually working on some of the components of this already. And so some things that pop to mind are processing at the tactical edge, basically working on processing capability to be at that tactical edge that's lower in size, weight, power, and cost, so that it becomes scalable, right? Combining that with some of the kind of autonomous tools that we're developing as well. Again, any of these things in isolation has potentially a minimal effect, but it's when you start combining the processing power at the tactical edge, autonomy, some of the AI systems, that's where you start getting more of an exponential kind of increase in capability, more of a strategic capability. So that's a great way to, again, capture information, data, if you will, and either act on it autonomously at the edge or find a way to send it back. If you send it back, that's where you get back into more of your C2 processes, which is another thing we're looking at, is breaking down those processes into discrete kind of decision points and functions, trying to figure out what can we augment with machine learning or what can we augment with AI to basically shrink the decision-making timeline, especially when you're talking predictive logistics. There's so many inputs that come into that, that timeline can become pretty burdensome and overwhelming. And the other thing we're seeing is with the amount of sensors and data collection assets that are out there, the amount of information, again, can kind of overwhelm the individual decision maker, which is why we get back into more of the machine learning tools, the AI that we're looking at. But one thing I'd like to reiterate is the data, right? There's always a limiting factor in the cost of these systems, but we're not really here to talk about cost. But data is actually the big limiting factor, because if it comes in piecemeal or inconsistent, or we have a bunch of isolated kind of stovepipe inputs, that's where AI and machine learning can really struggle, right? Because you're just adding exponential complexity on what it has to process, and that's going to start driving the time to develop these tools, the cost to develop these tools, and with logistics being so kind of a overarching concept with so many factors, the more you can reduce that complexity, the better tools we can get, the cheaper they can be produced, and the more quickly we can get them out in the field.
Great, thank you. Ma'am, did they answer any of your points or? Okay. So the second question was from Dr. Woody. So first test is that you remember the question. So I'll start with Meredith.
I wrote it down because I didn't want to miss anything. So I guess first I would be really interested in trying to help you visualize your data, ensuring that it's captured in a standard manner, in a digital manner, which I know is not always the case when we have training that isn't virtual. It's maybe in person in the field with a partner in an austere environment that represents those challenging environments we could potentially have conflicts in. You know, how do we capture that digitally? How do we standardize that? And then how can we visualize that data and just allow ourselves to see what the data tells us? And so when I say visualize data, I am referring back to everybody's favorite like 4th grade math class that taught you how to read a scatter plot and a histogram. And sometimes that means we revive data literacy and we remind folks how to build those plots from Excel. If we can start there and we can get all of that data captured in a standard manner, in a digital manner, and we can visualize ourselves, then we can start to visualize ourselves across time. And now when we look across time, we can draw conclusions to your point about where we're excelling and where we're struggling in different warfighting areas and training areas with the partner. I don't know that I'm as much value added with respect to virtual training, but I think we have an opportunity there for automation that already exists in suites. So think of things like our Microsoft suite has Copilot, and when we conduct a Teams call with our partner and we discuss the AAR, we're recording it and we're capturing it. Can I have a large language model summarize those last 15 calls for me? What are the trends that we talked about in AARs? So instead of a civilian or a service member taking all of those notes and manually reading them, I think there's some day-to-day staff opportunity to capture the goodness of LLMs that are largely open source. And I think that's something our data office can bring to bear with data professionals from data engineers, data scientists, system architects. I think that's certainly an area we can help you with, sir.
Colonel Errico, I know you guys have actually worked on a couple of these as use cases. So can you talk about some of those applications that you guys developed?
Yeah, sure. You know, I'm sitting here looking at CW3 Kyle McKenzie in the audience. He's the first graduate of the Army Software Factory to come to the Pacific Theater in a utilization assignment. I'm really happy to have him here. He's a designer. We trained him to be a designer. It's the only, to my knowledge, it's the only training model in the United States Army and really the Department of Defense where we train service members in agile and lean-centered design. The reason I'm bringing that up is because the use cases, the dozens of use cases we've solved or helped solve over the years start with problem decomposition like a modern tech company would do that. A lot of times the problem owner will come to us and say, I know exactly what I need, it's this, can you help me find this? And sure enough, after about 3 to 5 days of the right people in the room, you learn things about your organization you didn't necessarily realize, and you find out really smart ways to go after getting things in the short, medium, and long term that maybe you didn't realize. Maybe some of it is a commercial solution, maybe some of it is business process re-engineering, or maybe it's in the long term pushing your organization to a platform-centric approach that optimizes code reusability and making sure that your margins go to zero over time while increasing your speed to market, which in your case would be the ability to do repetitive virtual training or lessons learned from exercises. So I would really encourage a design session with your directorate and see what comes out of that before we sort of rush into what we think we need.
Great. Colonel Stevens, I know you are 60 days into your job, but thought it would be a good idea to ask your thoughts on this.
Yeah, so I don't want to repeat, some of the salient points that were made here, but you did mention kind of the infrastructure, like to share information in particular, and that kind of jumped out in my mind a little bit. And I was thinking on what's over here in booth 1542, the AFRL booth, and it's focused on kind of cross-domain solutions. Now, again, that's to go kind of up and down different classification levels, but I think there's an application there to share information with our partners, particularly when we're doing something in exercise or an operational environment, kind of to dissect that, because it's about getting the right kind of infrastructure in place where it's not just the speed of U.S. or internal U.S. decision making, it's the speed of sharing information, having partners trained up on that, and being able to act fast, right? It's not just decisions, it's the actions as well. And so again, being relatively new into the seat, that's where I kind of gravitated to on that question, is just thinking about, how we communicate, share that information more effectively, more efficiently. And again, it's something that can be scaled, because in a fight, in a conflict, you don't just do that once. You've got to do it over and over, weeks, months on end. And so that scalability thing, I just keep going back to some of the hardware, or I should say the infrastructure solutions that are out there.
Thanks. Chris, what's your thoughts?
I first want to compliment the J7 as the most active directorate with industry engagement. You guys set a clear and steady drumbeat, and so for industry in the room, if you're not on their distro, let's figure out a way to get you on there. There are virtual dial-in options, and it's an opportunity to both receive information, but also to provide feedback for the industry to J7 so they better understand, what the options and capabilities are out there, and that really helps you stay abreast of the latest and greatest that you have to employ. In actually employing that, a recent pitch that I heard in DIU, www.diu.mil, go in, put your email in, and you will get a notification every time there is a competitive solicitation on the street. That is the only venue that it goes through. There's no FedSim, SIM.gov, nothing like that, right? diu.mil. So in those solicitations, the most mature pitch I recently heard was a company that they had a product, but they didn't focus on the product. They focused on the fact that they were going to deliver the infrastructure, the processes to do the industry development, provide an opportunity to do software in the loop, hardware in the loop testing, delivered to a government test bed where that could then be certified and then deployed out to platforms. That right there, that upfront thinking is going to deliver a product that from day zero is going to support the iterative test and evaluation, modeling and simulation that you need in the J7 to actually realize a capability. If you try to go and integrate something in or patch it in on top later on, it's going to get ugly, messy, it's going to cost more, and it's going to take longer. So thinking about it up front is really important, and that's why those industry engagements and setting those expectations are so important. At the same time, organizations like TRMC and others that you guys are closely partnered with are doing a great job with a proving ground concept, which is about iterative test and evaluation early on. It's about when operators are getting tools, especially with all domain attritable autonomous systems, where if I have 5 or 20 or 30 of them, how do you maintain a velocity of learning with your soldiers or sailors on these ranges? And it's shifting away from these big DT, OT events that happen on a lower cadence, high risk of failure, overly scripted, to learn small, iterate small, and that's supported by technologies that allow you to do real-time evaluation of your test plan. And those are being tested, implemented, and fielded right now with the data analytics on the back infrastructure. And we're seeing that that is allowing us to say, inside the left-right bounds of what we wanted to do, no safety violations, move on to the next small test. We can send all the INQ data or the high-fidelity data back to the labs to look at for 6 months, but that's not going to hold us up from moving on to the next thing. And that allows you to do both hardware system level tests, but also your TTP development in concert with that. So those two things together, you guys are already running down that pathway. We should keep doing that.
All right, thank you. So now I have a couple of questions that, due to time constraints, and General Smith took about 5 minutes for my bio to be read, so I will take that back. But I think it will be a good idea. What I will do is I'll ask a couple of you each of these questions due to time constraints. So a lot has been written about culture change to curate more innovation. Aside from the often discussed culture change, what are some of the top issues you see preventing us from innovating faster or at a larger scale? So I'll start with Colonel Erica.
I think some of the other panelists have talked about data challenges, technical challenges, human capital challenges, which is near and dear to my heart at Army Software Factory. But I'll say this really interesting dynamic as cloud and now hybrid cloud and now AI infrastructure makes it into the sort of the scene. I think it's this dynamic of security versus compliance. And if you don't know kind of what I'm talking about, just real quickly, right? It's like the difference between, is the door actually locked, or is the sign on the door marked off to say that somebody checked that it was locked or not, regardless of if the door was actually locked? And we've got a whole generation of cybersecurity assessors that were trained and schooled up before cloud, before zero trust, and they don't understand necessarily the technical competencies to make a decision of whether or not something is truly secure or not secure. And it's already a population that self-selects into a sort of security mindset. So there's already like a bias towards risk, and or shall I say a aversion towards risk. And so therefore, I think that that's something that really holds us back from innovating at scale. It's this large-scale risk aversion when we think about the compliance assessors that own the risk for cybersecurity, which we've bifurcated away from the people that actually own the mission risk. And if you think about it, there's really no combat example where we would bifurcate risk, because usually there's one guy or a girl that owns risk, and that's the commander. And in this space, for some reason, we've bifurcated risk to subpopulations that don't necessarily make the strongest decisions based on the rapid nature of change in technology.
Good. Meredith, I know because of your special operations background and working there, making the change there as well, and now here at USINDOPAC, tell us how do you see the difference between doing innovative things over there and now here?
Yeah, so that's interesting because we were talking about before the panel a different appetite for risk in the special operations community, vice in the conventional force community. And the special operations community is significantly smaller, oftentimes has a higher caliber of stakeholder with respect to education level or operational capability. And so there's an appetite to assume risk. There is a desire to move fast, to celebrate failure, to learn from that failure and celebrate it, and really live the agile process. There's also a real desire in the special operations community to put technical experts in a place of leadership next to operational experts, and to build these really dynamic and diverse teams to collectively deliver a result. And that shoulder-to-shoulder work I've seen be really successful. When I moved over to the Army, I started to ask about ATO reciprocity and who owned Why were we all on different networks? And, I started to ask these questions, and I really uncovered a different culture and a different appetite for risk. But I also uncovered that there were areas where we were competing against ourselves for the same resources, as opposed to building alliances and competing for the resources as partners. So I think we can tackle some of that by building those alliances and looking at it from a macro resourcing perspective, not being afraid to trust one another and work in those dynamic teams. But I really appreciate your remarks about compliance, because I feel like you live at my office sometimes. I see that very regularly, so touched a good spot there, Vito.
Colonel Stevens, what do you think, sir? What's your thought from Air Force side?
Yeah, you mentioned culture, and the thing that jumps to my mind is risk aversion, which was just discussed. But I want to foot stomp that because, when we're talking about these types of technologies, innovation, experimentation, and AI, ML, all that stuff, you've got to move at the speed of relevance. And so if we're stuck in the old mindset, the old acquisition cycles, which are very sequential in nature, that just pushes out those cycles, and it's more difficult to field stuff that's still relevant. I mean, a lot of these technologies change within just a couple years. We're fielding stuff today that 2 or 3 years ago within AFRL people thought was unachievable, and here we are 2 or 3 years later fielding it. It's pretty incredible, and so we've got to be less risk averse, and I see that risk aversion showing up in 3 different areas. One is within the labs themselves. Right? No one wants to celebrate failure. No one wants anything to fail. And so we keep it in the labs too long in some cases, where everyone's trying to perfect it, make sure when it goes prime time or to a demo or to a test, that it succeeds. But if you don't fail at all, especially in a lab environment, I would argue you're probably not pushing the envelope enough. Right? The technologies that we work in are some of the most difficult in the world. So failure is bound to happen. So the key is trying to learn from it. And I think there's an opportunity with kind of the operational community, and Indo-PACOM comes to mind, where if we see opportunities to get something in an exercise, to get something in a demo, and knowing that it may not succeed, but there's an opportunity to get it in there and learn from it and educate the model, the machine model, the AI, whatever it is we're trying to do. But if you can take that failure and learn from it, then it's not a complete failure. And then that learning is something to celebrate. And I think, between the risk aversion we see internally in the lab, and then some of the risk aversion, when we talk with the operational communities, they're like, we don't want to insert something in a demo and have it fail in front of leadership. But again, if we can set the conditions, the expectation, where we're learning from that and driving it forward, that's a good thing. And then the third area where we see some risk aversion is from the program offices themselves. And I feel, as a lab guy, I feel confident speaking to that because I've worked in those program offices for about 20 years. And those program offices are the ones that receive stuff from the lab, and sometimes there is a risk aversion of, well, if the lab can just get it a little more mature or a little more robust before we take it. And so they push stuff back in the lab. So when you put those 3 levels of risk aversion together, you've got a very challenging environment to field cutting-edge technologies, tools, solutions that are staying ahead of the speed of relevance.
Thank you. Chris, I have a question from the DIU perspective, because some critics can say that now, as a DIU director, is direct report to the SecDef, and Congress has given $1 billion to go and fix DoD problems. So how do you see, being the LNO for Indo-PACOM, how do you see that you are able to drive that faster and efficiently for J6 and anybody else in the US Indo-PACOM?
Yeah, so it's amazing how far $1 billion doesn't go in the budget. But with that being said, DIU has really been empowered by the vision for the Deputy Secretary of Defense to align a lot of traditionally, adversarial pieces of the organization that slow things down, that are risk averse, that resist direction like ATO reciprocity to empower a more vertical alignment, highly focused on delivering to operational requirements. And so the way we do that is through the embedded nature of DIU. I am not the only embed out there, and so we have close pulses on, what the J6, J4, J7, J8, pick your Jader, what their needs are. And we also have in-house our own ability to bring technical expertise in, curate a problem set, rapidly solicit through our OTA, and put on contract, right? I think we advertised 90 days, but really it's more like 120. Still, it's not very bad. And this is a proven process, right? That was what DIU 1.0 and 2.0 over the last 10 years were about. Was about bridging gaps into the commercial space. It was about being able to get them doing business with the DoD. And now, by bringing the different capabilities of the department, alignment with Congress, it's allowing us to move quickly to scale and field. And so we put a lens on all the projects. It's really focused on executability. That there is a place for basic research. There is a place for, prototyping and experimentation. Right now, we're highly focused on delivering capabilities and time-relevant timescales to the combatant command. And so we're using all of those tools in order to listen. And one of the unique things that we're doing at Indo-PACOM, and that, I see DIU as an enabler, but this is really the vision of Indo-PACOM that we're trying to help support. And that if you look at the various programs that Indo-PACOM is trying to grow or adopt, it's the Joint Sustainment Development Tool. It is your mission partner environments. It is your joint fires networks. It is tool sets that are enabling, better operational flexibility in the information environment. These independently are important, but in aggregate, they're going to be greater than the sum of their parts. And so we are working through, bringing either an enterprise service bus or at the headquarters level, facilitating interoperability between these systems so that you have a more unified set of programs addressing the commander's priorities rather than a bunch of inherited silos.
All right. So can you share any of your service organizations, leading edge technologies and or capabilities that may be leveraged to create value in support of US Indo-PACOM priorities? I'll start with Vito.
Just repeat the question one more time.
So can you share any of your service organizations, leading edge technologies and or capabilities that may be leveraged to create value for US?
Thanks, sir. Yeah, so I'll give a pretty good example of something that we just did for 25th Infantry Division at the Chief of Staff of the Army's recent Transforming Contact Initiative. And that was, does everybody know what TAC is, or the Tactical Awareness Kit? As a lot of you know, operators, they have a big requirement to operate in an agile way where they're pushing data and pulling data from and to their higher headquarters. And so something that the soldiers at the Army Software Factory did with 101st Airborne and then with 25th just a couple weeks ago here on island, it was about how quickly we could build TAC plugins for air assault planning, air assault battle tracking, and air assault rapid response and contingency planning, to logistics sharing. So the running estimates that happen at the platoon level to the company level to the battalion level, so on and so forth, that people like General will ultimately filter up to people like General Kidd to make decisions off of, and the interoperability of what's real versus what the authoritative data source is actually telling you. So I think those are two pretty good examples that we kind of built on the fly and are continuing to refine based on these sort of ongoing transforming contact initiatives.
Meredith?
Yeah, I think the more interesting project that we have right now is a platform called the Asia-Pacific Analytic Platform, so AP squared. And it procures a large volume of commercially available information, but also scrapes some publicly available, open source, out on the internet data and applies various models so that instead of you manually reading, 15,000 articles from the Philippine Information Agency, you have a natural language processing model that was actually developed by a graduate of the Army's Artificial Intelligence Integration Center at Carnegie Mellon, who has now PCS'd out here and is working in our chief data office. But it's a GOTS platform, and it kind of is a hybrid approach. We have some technical talent who comes to us from defense contract industry, so they're keeping pace with relevancy in data science, and then we have some government civilians that are working on it. We've got GovCloud services. It's really a hybrid coming together. The real value I will tell you that we offer with this is that mission partners can have a login. There is nothing about it that's classified. It is information off the internet, right? So there's no reason our partners can't look at the same analytics that we are looking at. And the other value, of course, is that it doesn't cost us to add those users. So if the Air Force wants to look at the same analytics that the Army looks at, it's a GOTS platform, and so we achieve some efficiency there. And I'm really excited about next year, the 2025, FY25, we'll deploy it to our first mission partner. I'm really excited about that since it is a joint mission. All of the Indo-PACOM will benefit.
Thank you. The question I would like to ask now is, how do you see as a government that we do a good job asking the requirements, priorities of each of your organizations to the industry, to ask them to make sure that what they are working on, the R&D money that they are spending it within their organizations, that will help support you specifically, right? So we have organizations like DIU and others who are doing something similar. So how do you see, are we not doing a good job? Are we not inviting the industry partners to help innovate faster, quicker, with our help, instead of them creating some tool that, we go and look at on these conferences like this and come to find out this is not what we need? So is there a mismatch there? We as a government is not doing a good job on bringing them in early, or they're just not listening. What your thoughts are on that? So I'll start with Colonel Stevens on that.
So I think the answer is probably mixed. So when I think about our portfolio, and you're dealing with artificial intelligence, machine learning, unmanned aerial systems, quantum, cyber, we do better in some areas than others. And again, from the lab perspective, a lot of the things we're pushing are very kind of early, low TRL level type stuff. And so it's a hard question. Like I said, if you're looking at quantum, we're basically going to the different quantum vendors to kind of see what's the art of the possible. If you're dealing with cyber, some of the machine learning, or even AI, there's things out there that are more established, so you can put together a more robust. So
do you think we are doing a better job on certain silos and not a great job on others?
Well, I think a lot of this is so new, and I think that it might be the wrong question, honestly. Because if we're looking at certain silos and certain technologies, again, those are not, in and of themselves, a lot of those aren't going to move the needle. So it's the combining the technologies together, the UAS with the autonomy, adding the machine learning and AI into the command and control. And I think that's where the focus needs to be. And that's a hard thing to go to industry and say, hey, we're looking to fuse these two things together to get after this. But I think there are some areas, and again, I think it starts with communication between the labs and between the operational community, is understanding not necessarily the requirements, because a lot of the things we're looking at are like pre-requirement, right? They're conceptual. But it's asking the question, what is the intent? What is the objective that we're trying to achieve? And I go back to my earlier point of, we are fielding things today that 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even in some cases 2 or 3 years ago, people thought was technologically impossible. And then there's advances in some of the technologies or a way to fuse them together to get after the requirement. So I think rather than go into industry and looking for a solution that we can force fit in to a requirement, I think it's continued conversations between the labs, between the acquisition community, between the operators to understand the intent, and then to together kind of let us go find the best way to do that. And in some cases, that's going to be a sole source to industry. In other areas, it may be kind of a wide kind of industry announcement where we're trying to get certain capabilities. And in certain cases, we're actually doing some of this in-house. So it's a very good question, extremely complicated question. You can tell by my rambling answer. But again, I think it comes back to basic communication of intent between the operational community and the acquisition and the labs that are looking at these kind of things.
Thank you. Chris?
So it helps to look at probably the few examples that do this well, because they exist out there. And it's not just the people who have hired retired 3- and 4-star generals and admirals. It's the people who show interest in the problem set that they're trying to solve, who listen, and they don't try to shift the operational requirements to meet the thing that they built, but because they're industry and because they are agile and responsive to their customer, they figure out how the technology base that they've built fits the need of the operators. In this case, the customer is not your random civilian on the street. It is a fairly defined thing. So it is unreasonable to think that I could take something off the shelf at Target and take it and deliver it to the DoD. It requires probably some modification in most situations. And so that requires a conversation. And it's that open front door that industry needs to be able and willing to walk through, but it also needs to be those on the government side willing to sit down and have those open conversations. Doesn't matter if it's at the most highly classified levels or at the most generic open levels. We need to be flexible to have those conversations, and there are examples of those who are in organizations who are. My door is open to any industry at any point in time ever, and I know many at Indo-Pacom hold that same view. So if you're interested in what the Indo-Pacom priorities are, reach out. It doesn't have to be a trip to Hawaii, even though it's kind of nice. It can be a call on Teams or Zoom or Google Meets. It doesn't matter, right? And the last thing that I want to say from the DIU perspective is for every project that we run where we are going to industry and saying we think industry that you are the pacing capability here, we understand that there is some modification required. The most important part of doing that is not what we're asking for. We tend to write those fairly broad because the most important part is the operational stakeholders and the transition program offices and services that we intend to deliver to, right? We are not a PEO. We don't want to, start and run a program forever. We need to have somebody ready to catch that, and we bring them in as early and as actively as possible so that they can take that broadly written area of interest statement and really tailor what they need and want out of that. And that also gives us, the ability to do something that not everybody realizes that DIU does with our solicitations. There's actually 3 outcomes if you apply. You might get a not select, thank you, and you might be selected with a request for a prototype proposal. There's a third category as well, and that's where we put companies into a portal status. That means that for 180 days, if another customer, either through our engagement or through industry, your engagements, you see somebody else that wants your product, if you are in the portal, they can come, and as long as it meets that fairly broad area of interest statement that we write, we can work a contract out of that for you. And so it's a second at-bat that allows some additional flexibility for a broader customer base as well. So it's that flexibility, customer alignment, and then it's the conversation.
Thank you. Meredith and Vito, it will be 2.5 minutes for both of you guys because General Smith gonna kick us out. So if you don't mind, make it quick.
Don't make me go after Chris. That was really good. I think I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Colonel Erica?
I'll just say, I'll kind of anonymize it. There are countries and militaries in the world right now that do not have the capacity to test. They test when they field. Another military right now that is engaged in existential threat in a software-centric warfare, a software solution is completely obsolete in 6 weeks or less. That's the pace of change that we're talking about. So we talk about writing requirements documents and getting used to this requirements process. We have to wholesale change our mentality about how quickly we can onboard technology, how quickly we can modify it, and how quickly we can incorporate it into our value proposition. Thanks.
Thank you. We have some questions, sir. Anybody have a question here?
We have one question from the email. Seeing as zero trust for the network is different than zero trust for a K8's environment, how are you going to apply zero trust to your containerized environments and software factories?
I think it's a question for Colonel Erica.
Okay. Yeah, I think it goes back to what we were saying before. I think there's somebody in this room also that was running zero trust for the Army for a while. And, we're going to make sure that, first of all, we comply with the enterprise zero trust policies that are forthcoming. And I think if not already signed out by the Undersecretary of the Army, we'll continue to follow along with that implementation plan. But I think my sense is your larger point is that there's not a one-size-fits-all answer to zero trust. And I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all answer to anything that we've been discussing here today. And so I think it just comes down to the types of people that we try to recruit into the United States Army, how we empower them, and the sort of decision-making authority we give them to accept risk.
Any other question?
That's all we got back here. Anybody in the audience want to queue up to the mic?
Anyone besides me? Okay, cool. So first of all, thank everyone that actually participated. Hopefully you gleaned some information, some requirements from USINDOPACOM, from the J4, from the J7, and just in general. I really want to say I really appreciate the panel members. You guys have been fantastic. Thank you for your time, your wisdom, more importantly, your service. So thank you. Mr. Sapani,
Sir.
your personal friendship means a lot to me. You don't have to do this. You don't have to do a lot of things, but you do these things in support of our military and our government to help us succeed. So thank you kindly again, sir, for being here. And for everybody, if we can just give them a round of applause. Thank you kindly. If you did want to stay behind for any questions, I think they'll be coming off the stage. So grab them, and I'm on my way out. Thank you.